I guess we're live.
We're
All right.
live.
All right.
Live.
We're live.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 25th anniversary of the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, coming to you live from Portland, Palm Beach, Seattle, Boulder,
Chicago.
Where are you, Ken?
Chicago.
Chicago. And Christine?
Portland.
Portland. All right. So I'm Pete Rawlik, so that you don't have to be. I came up with this concept about 12 days ago and really threw it together with some of my favorite people in the world who knew a little bit more about H.P. Lovecraft's Reanimator than I do. The whole concept is Herbert West as a cultural icon. The pitch basically was that for 60 years, Herbert West existed in the shadow of Lovecraft's other creations without really being noticed. And I'm starting to understand why, and we'll talk about that later. But then with the film, he's really exploded, and he now stands very recognizably in comparison to other horror icons: Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers, Godzilla. All you really need is a little green syringe, and everybody knows who you're talking about at this point. So I invited my friends to help me talk about this with all of you. So let's do some quick introductions, starting with Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Morgan, author of Lake House Infernal and various other works, including several Lovecraftian tales in various anthologies.
Okay.
Right.
Molly?
My name is Molly Tanzer. I'm a writer and editrix. I've done a lot of work in the Lovecraftian world. I've written a Herbert West story or two. And I'm a big fan of the film. I actually showed it to some friends for my birthday last year, so like about a year ago. And my friend, who's like an academic librarian, was like, "This is a horror film about like who gets co-author credit on a paper. This is the best horror film of all time." And I was like, "I knew you would like it." So I'm a big fan of Herbert West and all of that different stuff, and I'm really excited to be here today, so thank you.
Kelly?
I'm Kelly Young. I am an editor at Strange Eons Publishing and a host of Strange Eons Radio.
And Ken?
I'm Kenneth Hite. I'm a role-playing game designer and author on subjects Lovecraftian, most recently Tour to Lovecraft, The Destinations, which should be for sale electronically on Halloween. So good for us. And Tour to Lovecraft, The Tales, in which I talk about all of Lovecraft's tales, including this one, including Herbert West. We used to break up the midnight Call of Cthulhu sessions, the late night sessions, to go watch the film when it dropped at the midnight movies. So we'd play until 11:35, get in the car, drive to the multiplex, go in and watch Reanimator, and then go back and play Call of Cthulhu all night for the rest of the night. That was me in the mid 1980s.
That's living the dream.
It was living the dream. It was living all of the dreams except, dating. That dream we did not live. We lived the other ones. But we obviously, big Reanimator fan. And in fact, to close off that plot thread that I left dangling, my wife and I, the last couple's costume we came as was Reanimator and Bride of the Reanimator to a Halloween party. So it's still there. It's still in our hearts.
Well, okay, so I'm going to go to Ken first. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the origins of the character. And Ken, you said you would talk about this.
Yeah. Obviously, Lovecraft comes up with Herbert West in response to his friend in the amateur press, George Julian Hotain, who says, "Why be an amateur press guy when you can be a semi-professional press guy?" And he starts a magazine called Homebrew, which was a thirst quencher for lovers of personal liberty, or America's zippiest pocket magazine. So obviously what it needed was stories about the reanimated dead. But for some reason, he asked Lovecraft to come up with a series character that would have adventures in each issue of the magazine. And Lovecraft immediately said, series characters are inartistic, they're terrible, you can't do anything good with them. And George Hutain said, but what if I gave you $5? And Lovecraft said, oh yeah, okay, then I'll do it. Lovecraft whined like a baby to all of his correspondents about having to write for money like a Grub Street hack. But indeed he did. So between September 1921 and June of 1922, he cranked out 6 stories, which we now know under the general title of Herbert West Reanimator, but which Lovecraft saw published under the title Gruesome Tales, Grew some Tales. So his literal first professional experience was the editor messing with his story, and then not paying him for a while until he needed another serial. Came back to get the Lurking Fear, and Lovecraft, like all writers, said, yeah, about the part where you haven't paid me for the last serial. So Hutain made it right, ponied up the rest of the money, and then paid him in advance to get the Lurking Fear out. The work wound up being 6 stories of 12,000 words total, and he was paid the rough equivalent of $75 per story now, which is, not great money, but it's, it's not exactly the embarrassing amount of money that it sounds like when you hear a quarter cent a word in the modern day. Robert H. Barlow says that Lovecraft made the stories up as he went along. He did not have an overarching plot concept for Herbert West. He just sort of invented the basic idea of a figure who believes, like Lovecraft, that life was merely a chemical process and could be instilled by the use of sufficiently advanced chemistry. And this is interesting because it's the first Lovecraft story in which a character embodies Lovecraft's beliefs and dies horribly as a result. And this, I think, is one of the interesting things about Lovecraft that we sort of, we shunt aside in the rush to the rest of his philosophy. But you contrast it with, say, Robert E. Howard, whose stories also embody his philosophy that barbarism is better than civilization, but his barbarian character wins. And Lovecraft believes that there is no God, that existence is entirely mechanical, and people who act on that basis die horribly. So it's an interesting level of philosophical inquiry, even in what are generally considered pretty wretched stories, not least by Lovecraft. He repeatedly refers to them as his worst work, that they're wretched, written down to the level of the herd, and of course hack work. He calls them that all the time, even as late as when he's writing to Henry Kuttner. He's saying, gosh, I don't know. He thinks he's being complimentary. I don't know how you churn out that left-handed hack work with such ease. It nearly killed me when I had to do it. So I'm sure, and yet Henry Kuttner kept writing back. That's the amazing thing about Lovecraft. Hutain gave him the word count, but had no constraints on subject matter. According to Lovecraft, he said, it can't be too morbid. And Lovecraft did his very, very best to make that happen. In terms of where Herbert West comes from, obviously there's a little bit of Dr. Frankenstein. And we have to remember that in 1921, people who were referencing Frankenstein did not reference electricity because the movie hadn't come out yet. In the novel, the corpse parts are awakened with alchemy. And so Lovecraft is simply taking alchemy one step forward into proper science. Well, not proper science, very improper science, but it's a chemical process. There's also elements of Robert Louis Stevenson's The Body Snatcher, which is about fun grave robberies gone bad. A Ambrose Bierce story called One Summer Night. And the only other scientific revival of the dead story that Lovecraft might have known about, besides Frankenstein, is a story by Julian Hawthorne, My Own Story, in which an opera singer masters the art of acoustically reviving the dead, and things go horribly wrong. People think oh no, Herbert West is obvious. Guy with a syringe reanimates the dead. That must have been stock when Lovecraft was writing. It wasn't. I looked in Blyler's Index of Supernatural Fiction. There's very, very few scientifically revived dead people in the literature before Lovecraft gives us Herbert West and gives himself $5 a story. So that's sort of the origin. There's more bits of it that I can come back to if people want, or if God forbid anyone else runs short. So consider this a threat. But that's where Lovecraft left us. It gets published February through July of 1922, and at least at one point, Lovecraft is in New York City with his buddies. He writes to, I think it's James Morton, and he says, I just so happened to be walking past a newsstand that had home brew in it, and I bought one casually and said, oh, who's this H.P. Lovecraft, huh? So even a terrible story that he hated writing, he had that Jones of seeing his name in print that never gets old. So it's good to know that his first experience, while miserably mechanical hack work, still made him happy, maybe while he was writing it. I think that there's a sense of fun that comes through, and also, in the most important part of being a writer, bragging to other people about your book. So there we are.
Oh, I don't know.
Bill,
Like hating what you're doing for money and also bragging to other people is like a pretty potent combo for
Yeah, it's very strong.
So building off of what Ken just said, I was trying to figure out why this character sort of disappears, that we don't see him, as much as we see Cthulhu and whatnot. So I did a little digging myself. From 1922 to 1980, the Herbert West serial appears in Weird Tales in 1942, 43. If I get these dates wrong, let me know. It's then republished in Arkham House's Beyond the Wall of Sleep. Then it appears in Arkham House's Dagon and Other Macabre Tales. Those are reprinted in Britain by Corgi and Gallant and Panther. Sorry. And then in 1970, it's not until 1977 that the Brits republish it in a collection called The Rivals of Frankenstein. That's the same year that the Necronomicon Press edition comes out. And Rivals of Frankenstein is republished in America in 1980. So, literally, there's no mass market edition except for the Weird Tales thing in the 1940s until 1980, when Barnes & Noble publishes The Rivals of Frankenstein. So this may be one of the reasons that the character sort of was in limbo. It was just not accessible to the general public. And I find that absolutely incredible, but also not, because I can remember looking for this story for years. I would go to used bookstores, and I had most of the Bantam paperbacks and the Lovecraft stuff. And in one of them, they had a list of all his works, and included was Reanimator. And I'm looking for it, looking for it. And finally, probably around 82, 83, I find the Barnes & Noble reprint in a bookstore on the Ocean City, Maryland boardwalk. And I literally clutched that thing to my chest, because it had not been, and I didn't realize it had not been available to the general public unless you were going small press. And, who really knew about small press back in the day?
Yeah, Will Murray suggests in a thing that he wrote for Crypt of Cthulhu that it's because of the structure of the story, that because it's actually 6 stories,
right,
not one connected story, even the way that Lurking Fear, which is still, riddled with climaxes and was written as a serial, but is not, it doesn't, for example, contain the endless recaps of other adventures the way that Reanimator does. And so the notion was that if you just published it as a story, it's 12,000 words, it's a lot of text, and it's not actually a very satisfactory story from an editorial perspective to present all at once, but you can't break them up because, you know, the notion of why isn't it in the Ballantine Lovecrafts is, what if you only bought one of the volumes? Then you've got 2 Herbert West adventures, which are recapping other adventures that you don't have in that book. You'll get mad, is the thinking. And so it's until you have either something like that Rivals of Frankenstein anthology that is presenting it more as a historical text than as a, isn't this a cool story? Or you are finally in a position where Lovecraft's name is so powerful that it will even drag people through the murk that is this story structure. There's nothing really there. I mean, there's no reason that an editor would put it in, basically, right?
Right.
Following up on that then, when it was originally reprinted in Weird Tales, was it serialized or was it dropped into one issue? It was serialized, okay.
Yep. So to give a comparison, I did the same research for Cool Air. And in that same period, Cool Air is published at least 20 times.
Wow.
So this is, you know, essentially Herbert West is the toe-headed stepchild of Lovecraft's literature. Nobody wanted to touch it, and probably for the reasons that Murray's saying. So then the movie comes out, 1985. Now, what I did to see this movie is well documented. Molly, you were probably too young to see it in the theaters?
I was 4.
Yeah, okay.
Well, let's hope you were too young to see it in the theaters.
Now, remember, okay, Christine,
Sorry.
did you see it in theaters?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the, I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s. So it was definitely one of those, hey, this looks crazy, you know, mad scientist kind of thing. I was not expecting it to be as hilarious as it turned out to be, with the head and the cat and all that. But it was definitely an experience.
Yeah, and so it was actually, you know, it was one of the first NC-17 movies. You could not go to see that unless you were 17. No way in. Kelly?
I missed it in the theaters. I remember I would clip out the newspaper pictures of films that were coming to Seattle, and we lived about 60 miles north of Seattle at the time. And at 16, there was just no way my mom was going to let me drive down to Seattle to see a horror film.
Right. All right. So do I need to talk? Yeah, I know Molly has heard my adventure to go see Herbert West Reanimator.
I think it's well worth repeating this story. I mean, there's some Grand Theft Auto, if I recall.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. You're right. It's very similar to you. I was actually 18, and I knew that there was no way in hell my parents were going to let me go out and see this film.
See, here's the problem you guys had, was asking your parents.
Yes.
That's just a rookie mistake number 1.
Right. So I convinced my grandmother to lend me her Buick Skylark, which, you know, is a land boat it has fins, and, you know, there was the back seat underneath the windshield, or the back screen. There was a place where, as kids, we would curl up and have sandwiches. It was that big. So I convinced her to lend me the car so I can detail it. And then I climb out my window and skinny down the pole, and I sneak out for a midnight movie. And I roll into the parking lot. Now, I'm thinking that this is taking me hours to get there, right? Because it's actually in a different county. It's at the Bucks County barn outside Philadelphia. And I think it takes hours. And I've looked at it. It's not hours. It's like 45 minutes. That's it. but everything seems longer and more distant when you were kids. So I park my car and I get out and I look, and there's a snack bar in the parking lot, and there's a representative from every law enforcement office in this in the Tri-County area. There's Game and Fish and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, county sheriffs and cops, and they're all just sitting there having hot dogs and drinking coffee. And I'm like, what have I just done? I've stolen a car. And like, so I start sweating like, I've smoked the joint, and they're gonna arrest me. I sneak it. I go to the kiosk, and I pay my money, and the cashier looks at me, and she can't be more than 16. She says, I need to see some ID because it's an NC-17 movie. So I pull out my ID, and she takes it and she starts typing something. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to go down on my permanent record. Everybody's going to know that I've seen this film. And, back then we talked about permanent records. There was no such thing as a permanent record, but we were so convinced. We really were. So then I get in, I see the movie, and it's like, it is the most brilliant thing I've ever seen. It's fabulous. It's almost better than Alien, because I had to watch Alien with my mom's hand across my face like this. This is like the first adult horror movie that I've ever really been able to see without my parents and not coming in on some UHF channel. So I get out of the movie, and I'm just so thrilled, and I don't really realize that it's like 2:30 in the morning. And now I'm like dealing with the consequences of, oh my God, have my parents realized that the car is gone? Do they know that I'm gone? Have they called the cops? Will they be looking for me as I drive home? So like I'm doing like 45 and a 55 down the highway. And then I just decide to get off at the first exit that leads to my house, and I'll just take the back roads where there'll be no cops. I'm going up and down and up and down. I'm going like up the hill, and I'm like, okay, at the top of this hill, there's the bar, the 19th hole, and then there's the golf course, and I'll just coast down past the golf course, and I'll go right into my driveway. And I get to the top of the hill, and there's the 19th hole, and there are 5 cop cars sitting there with their lights flashing. And there's one guy in the street with his light waving me forward. So I drive up, and I roll down my window, and he just keeps waving me on. He says, get out of here, get going, get going. And all of a sudden, the doors to the bar burst open, and there's 3 cops, and they're dragging this woman out, and she's topless. And I look at her, and she's my English teacher from high school. And the cop is just like, get out of here, keep going. So it's like, I cruise on through, I drive past the golf course, and I park the car right back where I was. I climb up the back of the house, I get back in my bed, and I'm home free.
And you have an A in English.
And I have an A in English, right? So I come back downstairs, and my dad is sitting there, and he's reading the paper, and he's listening to the news, and we're having breakfast, and he hears the radio. Last night, so-and-so arrested 6 people at the 19th hole for performing a live sex act on stage. 3 o'clock in the morning. And my dad just shakes his head. He says, like, there's no reason to be out that late. Anybody out that late is just looking for trouble. Yeah, Dad, sure. I still haven't seen his face. About that time, my grandmother comes in. I hand her the keys to the car. She goes out. She comes back in, and she hands me my jacket, and she says, you must have left this in the car. And as she hands it to me, the ticket stub drifts out onto the table. My dad looks at it, looks at me, just keeps reading the paper. Never says a word. To this day, he has said nothing. And I don't know whether or not he's proud of me or just severely disappointed.
But did you actually detail the car for your grandma like you said you would?
I did.
Okay.
I also discovered that my grandfather was smoking when he said he was quitting, but that's neither. I found where he stashed all the cigarettes on his side of the car. So, post this movie, after this film, let's talk about what happens. In terms of print, from 1987 to 2014, that's 27 years, Herbert West Reanimator appears 22 times, including in 6 Martin Greenberg anthologies, 3 Stephen Jones anthologies, and anthologies coming from Ackerman, Haining, Otto Penzler, and Carl Edward Wagner. So, in my mind, this is a huge sea change. Suddenly, Herbert West is important. And we start seeing crazy stuff. Comic book adaptions. Adventure Malibu comes up with an actual licensed adaptation of Reanimator. And they follow, I think this is 1991. And they followed up the next year with a prequel, Dawn of the Reanimator. Now, if you happen to have this set, you're severely lucky. This is a 3-issue set. If you have issue 2, in the last 6 months, this issue has gone from dollar bin to multi-$100.
Why?
The centerfold is an advertisement for a then new superhero. And it's the first time that superhero appears in print. It is Spawn. So this not really, really good comic is sought after by collectors now, but not because it's Reanimator. In my mind, it takes 30 years for the people who saw Reanimator in theaters and in video to sort of catch up and get to a point where they can start writing about him. And because, it takes time. You can't just watch the movie at 18 and say, oh yeah, I'm going to write myself a Herbert West story. It takes time. But that's what Molly did. Molly eventually decides that she wants to write a Herbert West story.
Well, I wasn't 18, but sure.
Yeah, but
I also feel like Archive of Our Own disproves your theory, but we don't need to get into that necessarily here.
Okay, well, no, tell me.
No, I just mean like like these days, I guess I feel like kids, like you see something and then like it's like by the time I got home from seeing The Force Awakens, I feel like there were like 87 erotic Kylo Ren Rey fan fictions that were like already
That's
published,
true.
right? So I'm just discounting the idea that an 18-year-old could like not process something and like write a fan fiction after it, since like I don't want to get into it.
You're probably right, and so I'm also probably a little what's the word? I was a little sheltered because at the time in the 80s we didn't have the internet. There was a lot of fandom, but it was and small press association stuff that was circulated privately, and it was really, really hard to find.
The mimeographed copies of erotic Herbert West fan fiction passed around at like conventions in the 80s, like if only. Like
yeah, exactly.
I'm sure there must have been, right? There's every other kind of slash in the world, so
right.
Herbert West / Kane must have been pretty soon thereafter, don't you think?
I would say it fits perfectly into the milieu of like what slash originally was before it just became like Snape and the Teletubbies or whatever it is you find these days.
Mm-hmm. First of all, I resent you bringing up my epic in this context, Molly.
Listen, you sent it to me for a review. I thought it was fair game.
All right, fine. I was not in the context of this panel, that's all I'm saying.
It's not true. None of this is true. Although I did once find a fanfic of that topic anyway, it's like a long story and it was just very disturbing.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead.
Dirty fanfic is another panel altogether.
It
later.
is.
So I could also be on, but
That's the after hours panel.
Right.
So, but I'm gonna
EOD After Dark.
I'm gonna diverge here. So, a long time ago, Christine Catherine Rush wrote me into a Star Trek Voyager novel as the villain, and I thought that was very amusing. Many years later, I searched my own name. I found slash fiction between myself and Chakotay.
Oh, you've arrived.
There you go.
So that was kind of
Get that Delta Quadrant action.
yeah, that's right. But yes, so okay, but Molly, my point is, what inspired you to write a Herbert West in love story?
I mean, I feel like Weird Eros is always where I draw inspiration for like the stories that of mine that people care about, such as Herbert West in Love. You know, and I don't know. I mean, I got into Lovecraft really late. I wasn't like one of those teen readers of it. I was definitely I came later to horror because I got really scared of. I still to this day, like I mean, I had to watch Midsummer with the lights on. Midsummer is not scary, right? And so like I just didn't take to it until late. And then after I saw the film and like read a bunch of stuff about it, I have a artistic fascination with like school stories, and Miskatonic University is definitely one of my favorite topics, or it has become one of my favorite topics to write about. And so both of the times that I've worked with West as a character in my Lovecraftian fiction, it's been at Miskatonic, and it's been about sort of university stuff. And since those are naturally subjects that I have always gravitated to in my own work, I feel like Herbert, when I saw Reanimator and when I first started getting into it, he was sort of like the natural fixation for me, because he is the squirrely academic who's like clearly got a lot of anxiety. And so I was like, oh, this guy. And, you know, here we all are.
Yeah, he does have a lot of anxiety, right? Even if you discount the movie, even in the story, he's kind of obsessed, and he's really frustrated when things don't go his way. And maybe that's part because Lovecraft really doesn't understand some of the scientific method, or he's bound by the short story format, and so he's got to get that emotional anxiety out there quick. And I detail some of this. The proper way to do this in Reanimators, using like rabbits and rats first, and that's in Lovecraft. He does start off that way.
The serial killer trajectory, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and yes, you're right. He is a serial killer.
And then Lovecraft in the story talks about how, because Herbert West is so young, he has this sort of dramatic idea, this fantasy of revenge and adulation. I mean, Lovecraft, for a guy who basically didn't know a lot of people, Lovecraft did a pretty good job of pegging that sort of frustrated grad student vibe that Herbert West has. That, you know, how dare they, you know, cut off funding for my research, I'll show them quality, which again, you know, when Lovecraft was writing was not the cartoon that it is now. They laughed at me at the Academy. I mean, he's writing kind of before that becomes the big modus for mad scientists.
Well, I also have a pet fan theory that is entirely unproven, but I think there's a strong circumstantial case for this, which is that like there's actually a Victorian novel called The Beetle that was published the same year as Dracula, and it's kind of fallen out of. It's not Dracula, right? Like I read it in a class that I took like long ago, and there's a scene, and it's an interesting. I find it interesting text in a lot of ways because it has sort of like 4 mini stories that create a whole, and one of them is a mad scientist who ends up actually like experimenting on a cat in a scene that's like very echoed in the like Stuart Gordon film. And but the character who is sort of doing all these experiments and who is doing all these things with like life and death, I feel like Lovecraft, being such like an avid reader, like may have encountered it, because I know when I read it, I had just sort of started getting into Lovecraft and had seen Reanimator and was like, this is really weirding me out. And I didn't know a lot about Lovecraft's biography at that time, but in terms of just sort of like mad scientist characters, I feel like he probably would have encountered this book because it only kind of fell out of circulation more recently. Like it outsold Dracula the year it was published in 1890, right? I mean, it was much more famous. And then people became sort of more interested erotically in vampires than they were in like genderless, problematically orientalist, like scarab people from Egypt. And like, I don't know what's wrong with people. Like, I don't understand how that happened, but like, you know, the beetle fell out of our consciousness and Dracula is still like reigns supreme. And so I don't know, like I sort of have wondered often if he encountered that and if that was sort of a touchstone for him, because the represent, like, I don't know, I got a vibe from it when I read it.
There's a reference to a couple references to the beetle in Alan Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
And then China Meeville in his Presidio Street Station has beetle-headed people that have sex with normal people.
Yeah.
So,
it's wild. There's like a Sherlock Holmes style segment. There's like a young girl's diary. And then there's like a very Dickensian, like, I was down on the streets of London climbing in windows and like blah and like things. And it's just like a really, I don't know. I think it's a great book. I wish more people, I wish there were more editions of it that were circulated, but the one I had was like an academic edition that has a spoiler for the end of the novel and like the first chapter as like a note. And I'm just like, you guys, listen up, nerds. Some people are just going to read this. Like, we need a new edition of this book.
Yeah, he mentions the beetle, I think, in supernatural horror and literature, so we know that he read it at least by then. Whether or not he'd read it in 1921 is a different question.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I know. Like I said, it's unproven, but I was like, it seems like it could be true, right?
Yeah, can't rule it out.
So what I think about of the explosion is in 1999, Reanimator is mentioned in the film American Beauty. And after that, there's Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Reanimator episode. 2001, there's The Mystery of the Necronomicon. Molly, did you want to talk about that?
No, what is it?
Mystery of the Necronomicon? Somebody said that they had seen it.
I have not seen it. I saw the anime that has him in it. That was my claim.
All right. Oh, that's Demon Bane?
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, okay, good. In 2003, we get Beyond Reanimator. We also get Christian Matsky's short film Imperfect Solution. 2004, we get Repenetrator, the porn parody film, and a short comedy film called Angry and Moist about Herbert West's half-brother. And then in 2005, we get a short film from Craig Miller called Herbert West Reanimator. This just sort of explodes onto the scene where West is just, from 2005 on, there's all these comic books that are just everywhere involving Herbert West. And sometimes they're licensed and sometimes they're not. And then there's a whole bunch of films too.
Who would they be licensed from?
There's a organization called Herbert West Reanimator LLC.
Really? Okay.
And I think they're essentially licensing the likeness from
Jeffrey Combs?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And of course, the irony there is that Jeffrey Combs has taken over the image of Herbert West in much the same way that Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee, between them, took over the image of Dracula. No one cares that Dracula has a mustache.
Right.
Because Dracula doesn't have a mustache. Because
no one cares.
Lugosi and Lee didn't have a mustache, so obviously Dracula doesn't have a mustache. West is obviously not a blonde with watery blue eyes and a sensitive mouth, like he was in Thank You, Pete. But everyone knows that Herbert West is a manic-looking brunette guy with the classical bone structure of Jeffrey Combs, right? Yeah. And he does wear glasses in the story, but one expects they're not big proper horn rims that Lovecraft describes them as spectacles, which to my mind makes me think he's got the sort of granny John Lennon glasses on while he's reanimating people.
Sure.
Yeah, so a series of books that I really enjoy, the Johannes Cabal, the Necromancer books by Jonathan L. Howard. Like his Johannes Cabal is definitely much more in line physically, descriptive wise, with the original Herbert West, and he's definitely like a magical counterpart to Herbert West. Like he uses sort of that traditional alchemy and necromancy and all these different things, and as opposed to like, this is science. And so it's interesting to see his sort of physical link back to the original, and now that the ascendant image of like Combs has sort of taken over the public consciousness of it. And they're great books. They're really fun.
Yeah, they are. So does anybody want to talk about the musical adaptation of Reanimator?
I've never had the chance to see it.
Okay, no, that's an answer. That's a no. But yes, there was a 2011 musical adaptation that Stuart Gordon was involved in, kind of limited.
Is there any footage of that anywhere available?
I haven't been able to find any.
Okay.
I've seen some stills, but that's it.
All right. So in 2013, I write Reanimators. In 2014, Audrey Driscoll starts her Herbert West series with The Friendship of Mortals. This is a Herbert West, essentially romance series. It's up to 5 books now. And I go online and I say, oh my God, 2015 is going to be the 30th anniversary of Reanimator, Herbert West Reanimator, the film. We should do a volume to honor the memory. So in 2015, we released Legacy of Reanimator with stories from Christine, Molly, and gathering up a whole bunch of really hard to find stuff that was published in the small press. Herbert West Reanimated, Herbert West Reincarnated, and I commissioned a bunch of stories to fill in the gaps from some really good authors. Christine, you took on this sort of role to write a story of a very young Herbert West.
Yeah, I love themed anthology calls because they always get me. They challenge me to think of things I might not otherwise have. And the combination of the mad scientist and the creepy kid, it's like, I bet he was a creepy kid when he was in school, not Miskatonic, but, really little school. So, and I love writing from the point of view of children. And I think it fits especially well with cosmic horror because children already kind of exist in their own cosmic horror world that is full of things they don't understand and powerful beings that are unknowable and vague rules and all that kind of stuff. So then I went back and it was one of those rare situations where the timing just all added up. The title of the story is Thought He Was a Goner, from the song about, the cat came back the very next day, which when I looked back historically would have come out just like a year or two before Herbert West would have been the age I was writing him in the story. And then with the cat coming back and all that. And so I wanted to present him as he might have been as the creepy kid in school, but I decided to go with not from his perspective, but from that of a little girl who has a crush on him, who then turns out to be kind of a creepy kid herself. So all the history added up really well, including where he's living with his elderly aunts, and he brings a cigar box with dead mice in it because one of his aunts raises fancy mice, which was actually right about that same time a new craze, mostly in England, but had come across to America as well, like with little purse dogs and stuff, only they were breeding these fancy mice. So it just all really fit together really well. I had a lot of fun with it, and I don't know, it was a real treat. So thank you for pushing me in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a very good story. I really appreciate it. So we're at the 152 mark. Gwen told us we could go over if we wanted to. But and we could look. I could talk about this for hours, because I love this stuff. There's so much Reanimator stuff coming out. I mean, I just picked up this the other day. Herbert West and Astounding Tales of Medical Malpractice. I mean, it's cute. It's Herbert West done cute.
It's a comic book.
It's a comic book, yes. And
it's a legal textbook.
People just give me this stuff.
Now that's cool.
Yeah. But what I want to talk about just briefly before we go into public comment, you can tell I work for government, to comments from the audience or questions from the audience, is why do we think that suddenly Herbert West has become an icon, right? Everybody knows who he is now. And he's right up, to me, he's right up there with Dracula and Frankenstein.
I suspect Google has a different opinion.
I'm sure
I feel like that is.
Am I exaggerating?
Like a generous to Herbert reading of. I mean, I don't know. It's like hard because I feel like in I don't know, like in our world, like he is totally up there with like Jason and Freddy, but I don't know if I. Like, I mean, like my friends who I showed this to on my birthday last year, like one of them is a little older than me and his partner's a little younger than me. And like, neither of them had seen it or really even ever heard of it. And they're definitely like nerds of a fine pedigree who do some horror stuff, like not as much like schlocky stuff, but they want the like 2010s horror that could be your PhD dissertation style of, like that kind of horror they like. But like, I don't know, they definitely know who Freddy Krueger is, but I was like, here is Herbert West. And they were like, wow. So I don't know, I guess my own experience of things is like a little, that he's B tier if those are A tier.
Okay, I'll buy that.
I don't know.
I won't argue with you. I'm
maybe it's just that I like feeling like a sophisticated group of consumers who understand just like a little bit more than like your average schlock jocks, but that, I don't know, that could be my bias. Like,
Ken?
Yeah, I think some of it has to do with the science, because it used to be that magic or the paranormal or whatever was the big scary thing, and then we started moving into an age where science was becoming more powerful and scarier than superstition. So that approach, that scientific approach, I think really helped give him a push, because I mean, in this day and age, what's easier to believe in? A book that will open portals to some eldritch realm, or an injection that'll raise the dead. I mean, we're seeing stuff like that on the news every day now.
I
West QAnon leader.
I just saw
West is Q, pass it on.
Yeah. I just saw an article where they've actually extracted DNA from insects in amber. So yeah, it's not like
dinosaurs.
Yeah, it's not like we hadn't had movies about that. So
I don't want to freak everybody out, but I just opened up on my other screen a Google search for Dracula, about 58 million results. I opened up a Herbert West, not even Herbert West Reanimator, but Herbert West, 147 million results. So that's kind of shocking, right? I would have thought Dracula would be more searched than Herbert West. Now, if I were to type in Reanimator instead of Herbert West, I imagine I get different result, because there are real Herbert Wests in the world, right? And that drops it down to 3,450,000 results.
Okay.
So he's an order of magnitude less than Dracula, which is still an order of magnitude bigger than I would have put him at.
Yeah.
Sure. And that's an interesting way to couch that. That is the marvel of modern technology.
I mean, it's certain that he's got his own moment, and we're in an era when microcultures can create their own media in a way that has never been true before then. So obviously, I mean, Molly brought up the fanfic communities that are now the engine of popular culture, really. but they can go down to incredibly narrow fandoms that, you know, old people like us have never even imagined, much less heard of. But that a Herbert West fandom is capable of supporting, you know, action figures and comic books and small movies in a way that nothing that size would have been able to do, just physically, just in a, you know, a Marxist sense. The means of production wouldn't have been there before 2000. So we're in an era where a lot of micro things can blow up to a size, but are we going to have a world where there are 13 Herbert West movies in a cycle, the way that there have been 13 Jason Voorhees movies?
Yeah, Herbert West in space, like I am there for that, but I don't know if we're there yet. Or
right.
like
and so I guess in the world where everyone in Hollywood is desperately unoriginal because they've stifled creativity in every other aspect of the world, and they're looking around for IP to mine, you know, we could turn around tomorrow and see that Netflix has greenlit a prestige series about Herbert West. But I think that we're in a position right now where Herbert West is one of a lot of things that are on bubbles, and we have our own specific reasons, auto theft or otherwise related, to love Herbert West. And the notion that something that Lovecraft had literally dragged out of him in 1921 is in that mix, is in that conversation, is kind of fun and fascinating, because, you know, if you compare just big screen availability, Herbert West beats Cthulhu still.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, obviously, I think if you search on Cthulhu, you probably beat Reanimator. But if you counted up, you know, feet of actual footage released in actual theaters, Herbert West is like running laps around Cthulhu. So
that new movie with Kristen Stewart running around in her underwear the whole time.
Yeah.
Even with that.
So just 3 things before we start taking questions from the audience. 2008, there was a pitch and apparently some work on Herbert West Reanimator, the television series. That was pitched by Meredith and Eric Red, who did The Hitcher and Near Dark.
Oh.
I just watched this last week, 2017, Ivan Zukon's Herbert West Reanimator. It deviates greatly from the source material.
Not good in any way.
Yeah. And then in post-production right now is Herbert West Reanimator, starring Brad Dourif.
Okay, I'm on board with
Check
this.
it out.
Yeah.
So he's got to get paid.
I hope he's not attempting to play a college student.
Look, it's in times of COVID, it's hard to find out anything.
Maybe this
They
is
didn't call
him
him
in
back
World
for
War
Dune,
One.
so like, what's he up to? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I don't know. Like, I have a friend who has a fan theory that, like, you know, one of the reasons that we have all of these interminable remakes from Hollywood is that, like, media is so diversified. Like we were talking about the bubble, right? Where it's like you have all these people who are like all in with these microcultures, and then broadly, that's not the same anymore, which is both good and bad. And so for films, they have to keep going farther and farther back to find things that everybody recognizes. And so I think that Herbert, the fact that we haven't seen a resurgence of Lovecraft stuff like that, plus definitely Herbert West, means that, like, some people just don't think that their recognizability is there to get that sort of impact of, like, yet another. I mean, I'm really excited about the Dune movie. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I will see it when I can in the ways that I can, but like, that's much more like, people are like, oh, it's Dune. And I think you've got like a lot, I don't know, maybe if they cast Timothée Chalamet as Herbert West, then we get the kids in on it, which is not a bad idea. If anyone's out there listening about this, like, I would watch this film, but like, yeah, I don't know.
all right, so I've asked for softball question. Favorite Herbert West fanfic or non-HPL short story?
Oh boy. You couldn't have told us you were going to ask this question?
I just got it from the
Discord.
Yeah, from the
I
Discord.
remember really loving that Crypt of Cthulhu that was dedicated to him, and there were a couple of stories in that I do remember loving. I can't quite off the top of my head remember what any of them were called.
Wait, they're in my book. Where'd my book go? All right. So are you talking about Herbert West Reanimated or
Maybe.
Herbert West Reincarnated?
So, okay, that helps. No, I don't know.
They're all called that.
You know, out of all this, you know, I have to say that I really, really do love In the Devil's Garden by Joseph Pulver,
Yes.
which is Herbert West in Auschwitz, I think. Now, also in that is that the story that wraps it all up is The Chaos into Time by Michael Cisco,
I did love that. Yes.
which Herbert West eventually just becomes a god and reanimates the universe. Let's see what else we got here. Anybody else have a favorite story?
You know, I did like Craig Mullins put out a one-shot that Reanimated States of America that kind of imagined a post-apocalyptic world because all of his creations have gotten so out of control.
Yes. I think I blurbed that.
What's that?
I think I blurbed that.
Okay, yeah, it was a fun little book.
Yep.
I don't know about a story, but I think the very first Lovecraft Film Festival I went to, there was a short film called Reanimate Her that was sort of like a obviously like a riff on it, and that was like a really enjoyable one. And I don't know, I like a short film, so it was like a cute entry in that year.
Also, one ticket to Herbert West in Space, please.
Yes, no kidding.
Yeah.
Someone call me.
Starring Timothy Chalamet.
Yeah, yeah, we'll just reuse all the stuff from Dune,
Mhm.
and we give him like a big needle,
Right.
and then like, have
And a
him
blonde wig, and we're
talk to
there.
Rawlik who's trying to talk to his lab partner. It'd be great.
Gwen says that Reanimate Her was fun at local PDX filmmaker.
Nice.
Great. Yeah,
Um,
no, it stood out in my mind. I remembered it. It's been like 5 years, so, or maybe even longer, maybe like 7.
Right. One of the things that I think about is that as long as you stay away from Jeffrey Combs' likeness and you just deal with Herbert West, the character, it's pretty much in the public domain. So you don't have to worry about it. If you want to do Herbert West in Space, you can do Herbert West in Space. You don't have to tie it to the original book or the original movie. So yeah, and I think that may be one of the reasons we see this character proliferating is because it's in the public domain.
It was why I was so surprised when you said that people were licensing it somehow.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know, I need to start something like that. Like, excuse me, you need to have like all Herbert West license, like all of that licensing is now officially me. Like,
Yeah. Any other questions from anybody? Oh, somebody's typing. I gotta get my look, I'm gonna admit it. I'm old. I gotta have my glasses on to read my phone.
I've worn glasses since 2nd grade, so I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily an
I
age
was
related.
6.
All right, yeah.
More like you're old and you need your glasses. It's not.
Yeah, I'm old and I need my glasses.
To
It's really gotten worse in the last 7 months because I spent so much time on the laptop.
But what hasn't gotten worse in the last 7 months, really? I mean, just
True.
My diet's actually gotten better. So this is not a question. There's a Herbert West short in our final block on Sunday. It's a comedic tale called Reanimated.
Oh, cool.
So, all
That's
right.
really fun.
I know this is a difficult format to do this, but if anybody has any other questions, start typing because we're almost out of time.
To fill up time, I will mention that in the 2017 film Life, Ryan Reynolds says, "This is some real Reanimator shit we're getting up to here." And I thought, when the biggest star in the world name drops H.P. Lovecraft,
Wow.
then that's a big step. And
That's
I
true.
just thought, you skated right past Repenetrator, but I just want to let you guys know that the character in that film was named Hubert Breast. So,
I mean, that's like pure porn parody energy right there. Right?
oh, it's brilliant. 22 minutes. Really hard to watch if what you're trying to do is actually use porn for its intended purpose. But it does actually have a bit.
It sounds like a challenge, actually.
It's I mean, if what you want to see is a lot of blood and dead bodies having sex, then this is the film for you.
Oh, I don't know. Have you watched Grub Girl?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
All right. So
Speaking of niche interests,
yeah. Who
It's
did
not
that?
as much my wheelhouse.
Oh, that's Ed Lee. There was an adaptation of.
oh, there's a shocker.
Yeah. There's a comment we heard fairly recently from John Penny and Brian Usna that there is a work commencing on the next Reanimator film. No details beyond that notion, but there you go.
I've heard that too, but I had also heard a rumor that that they were going to do like House of Reanimator with like him reanimating the president, but then he like Obama happened and they were like, meh, and it's like the time is nigh.
Yeah. Yes. Now is the time, particularly with COVID, right? You could just, there's so much you could riff off right now. Okay. So yeah. Gwen, if you're listening, I think we've beat this horse to death.
And right? Reanimated it and then beat it to death again.
It's like a cat. Molly, do you still have the cat that goes with your costume?
I do have it somewhere. I was thinking about like, should I get it out? And then I got lazy because it's in like a tub of costume things. But yeah, like my every time I log into my computer, my image is still of me dressed up as Reanimator with like a big syringe that's like my icon when I like log into my Mac stuff. So it still lives in that way.
All right, so I want to thank all of you for showing up. Is there anybody who's working on a project? You got a 30-second pitch, each of you. Whatever you're working on, tell us about it.
I'll tell you right now that Strange Eons is publishing a really cool chapbook from Philip Fracassi that'll be out in January or February called Commodore.
Lovely. Okay. Ken?
I got my plug-in at the top of the show, but I'll repeat it. Tour to Lovecraft: The Destinations will be available in electronic form on Halloween. So everyone get ready to log in and buy it from Atomic Overmind Press or whoever else you buy things electronically.
Molly?
I'm actually going to plug, I have the story bundle up that actually has one of Christine Morgan's, her Viking Tales book is in there. It's available. It goes to a great cause. You can get, 5 books or 15 books, depending on it. A lot of the change goes to Planned Parenthood at the end, and you'll be supporting Word Horde, which is an independent publisher that does like amazing literary horror and literary fantasy work. It's up right now. And yeah, if you like, you can definitely schedule out those deliveries. So if you want to do your holiday shopping for all of the weirdos in your life or send someone a holiday treat, this bundle is like a great one that you can send them along.
Christine?
And I will totally piggyback on that to say that the second of my Viking collections should be coming out sometime in the next couple months. The pandemic put everything into tailspin, but yeah, the Wolf's Feast, which is a companion volume to the Raven's Table, which also has some of my Vikings mythos stories in it, because one of the things I love is combining historical eras and other mythologies with the Lovecraftian stuff. So.
That's awesome.
What about you, Pete? I saw a cover on Facebook just recently.
Oh yeah, so we just finished and announced the Book of Yig, Revelations of the Serpent. It's a collection of, I think, 4 novellas dealing with serpent men, and it includes for me a Wingate Peasley story that I call him the terrible old man because he's just a nasty spook. So yeah. And I be honest with you, you're right. The pandemic put a tailspin on everything, and I didn't write for 4 months, and then in the course of 2 months, I did 2 novellas and 3 short stories. So saved it all up. All right, Gwen, that's it. I think we're done. Cut the feed.